I think part of the problem we're having with Trump is every day he's adding another issue that, on the face of it, looks completely illegal, un American, no American values involved in it. You can't keep up with it.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Independent Americans. I am your host, Paul Rieckhoff. Summer is here, and I am trying to soak it in. It's been a hard couple of months for all of us and for the show and for me, quite frankly, and I need a break. Take vacation or you get stupid. That's one of my great mentors, Les Gelb, always told me. So I'm doing that. I take a couple of days off here at the beach with the kids, down at the Jersey Shore. So as we go into a big week ahead of July 4th, I'm going to play some special replayed episodes, my favorite conversations over the past 6 years or so we've been doing this show as we lead into Independence Day or Independence Day. It's going to be a big America 250, but take a break when you can. And if you're on the road or you're pulling a late shift, I hope that these episodes bring you back to some of my favorite conversations that we've ever had on this show. So happy summer. Here they are, special conversations as we get ready for a big July 4th. Thanks for tuning in to Independent Americans. Keep subscribing, leave us 4 stars, and spread the word, especially as we go into what could be one of the most important summers of our lifetime. But make the most of it every single day and stay vigilant. Goodbye from the beach. All right, folks, on this really important Thursday, to help us stay vigilant, to help us understand this moment, and especially the national security components, a returning champion, the MS Now national security analyst, retired 4-star general, 4 combat tours, 3 Purple Hearts, a voice of wisdom and reason and perspective and candor. The great and powerful General Barry McCaffrey is back on Independent Americans. Welcome back, sir.
Good to be with you, Paul.
It is wild times. I want to get into all of it with you. I want to talk about Davos and Greenland and even talk about Iraq. But as I always ask all our guests, and I always want to ask you, where are you, sir? And how are you?
Well, I'm out in Seattle, surrounded by family in this community and the usual Seattle winter weather. So all is good. I'm very glad to be with you to talk about some of these issues.
Since you're in Seattle, I got to ask you, big football game this weekend. Are folks in Seattle pretty excited about the Seahawks this year? Looks like they got a team that's good enough to potentially win it all.
Yeah, no question. One of our receivers is injured and isn't going to play in the game, and the quarterback is slightly injured, but the excitement approaches hysteria. So good news for Seattle and the Seahawks.
Sports has been, intersecting with politics more and more since I've got you on. I wanted to ask you if you saw Trump announce this week that he wants to forbid any other football games from happening during the Army-Navy game. The great game. I know I love the game. I'm sure you do. But any reaction to that new mandate from President Mayhem?
Well, it's just simply unbelievable. I mean, what is this, Kim Jong-un? It's just incredible. It sounds like a lawless statement that's embarrassing to the armed forces.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of them. I think he's also, smartly and shrewdly manipulated that game in particular to look like the entire audience loves him. So it's a great photo op for him and Vance, and it almost feels like a military parade because it's the one audience where they're not going to boo him. So every year he's guaranteed to have, 4 hours of almost like a Trump infomercial around the Army-Navy game. I mean, it cuts to the core of how I think he's using the military more and more for political optics and even for propaganda. Can you talk about the danger of that part?
Well, it's happening from the lowest level of the armed forces to the senior officers. The politicization of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. It's simply unhealthy for our image with the American people. The U.S. Armed Forces, as you know, are the most trusted institution in American life. The polling is consistent on it. But that trust depends on them thinking not only the excellence of the armed forces, but also their non political nature. They stand apart from these terrible, angry, divisive state of affairs in American politics. So I think it's a terrible thing that Trump has done, and it's going to get worse.
Can I ask you to go a little deeper on that? One of the things that deeply concerns me is that pretty much everything he touches goes down in popularity. People don't trust what he's around. People feel it's overly politicized. And the military has always been that one institution that people still trust. But now he's got National Guard in the streets. He's got a radical, culture warrior, in my view, in Pete Hegseth. A lot of folks confuse ICE with the military. People around the world are now afraid that we're going to invade Greenland. He's crossed all the lines that are supposed to divide our politics from our military. And I'm really worried that we're going to hit a new low of mistrust for the military we haven't seen since, you were in Vietnam. Can you talk about the danger of that and where you see this going if he keeps using the military as his own personal hammer?
Well, I think an even larger problem is the change in the way the American people are going to view law enforcement. My experience has been over the many years, and particularly in the drug-related issues, that I developed an enormously high regard for law enforcement. I mean, the basis of American law enforcement is clearly sheriff's departments and local police forces, but all the way up to the highly trained, effective FBI, Marshal Service, DEA, and other federal law enforcement agencies. So those people now are going to be viewed in a very different light. I watch in particular the Los Angeles deployment of ICE and other federal agents. By the way, you frequently can't tell which federal agency involved, but they were moving to contact in a V formation, carrying M4 carbines, body armor, helmets, camouflage uniforms, masks up, and they had armored vehicles as part of that V formation. I thought, this is Mosul, Iraq. What are we doing here? Never mind the whole notion of without warrant and attacking peaceful protesters with pepper spray and flashbang grenades, savaging people personally, dragging them, knocking them down. So the precious trust in federal law enforcement, which was always there. I mean, there were jealousies between state and local and the feds, but at the end of the day, the federal law enforcement guys were the ones who came in with very sophisticated techniques, but an exquisite attention to detail on acting like cops, not the Second Ranger Battalion. So I think that's eroding. And now finally, we've been watching in the last 3 days, the 11th Airborne Division, based largely in Alaska, a couple of parachute infantry battalions apparently on standby to deploy to Minneapolis. Uh, just an outrageous misuse of the armed forces, which will blend into those ICE people. I mean, you can't tell looking at an ICE formation that they're law enforcement in any ways frequently.
I think that's so important. So I mentioned on the show this week how Governor Tim Walz, who was a sergeant major himself in the National Guard, said if they deploy Minnesota National Guard troops, they're going to have reflective vests. They're going to have road guard vests, right, that we know about so well in the military, so that people can differentiate National Guard from ICE, from local law enforcement, from others. But I want to ask you to stay on the 11th Airborne because we've talked a lot about the danger around the potential for the Insurrection Act. I want to ask you to address that in particular. I mean, he's got these folks on standby. They've said to go into Minneapolis. Now they're going into Maine with ICE. And I've been concerned that he could use them as bodyguards for ICE, right? As to try to keep people away from ICE and say that if you attack, ICE, you're going to have to basically go through the National Guard, which puts our troops in a terribly awful position, the likes of which we've really never seen. But can you talk about your view on the likelihood of him invoking the Insurrection Act, and then the dangers if he does break that glass and pull that lever?
Well, I think if you speculate on what Trump will do, you're making a terrible error. By and large, in the past, when he does these nighttime fulminations and puts out statements on Truth Social that are rapidly picked up and spread throughout the country, normally he does follow through on things. But by the way, a comment. Yeah, I've served in the National Security Council under three different administrations, Republican and Democrat. Saturday morning, every day when I was a J5 Joint Strategic Planner, I'd be over in the NSC basement on a meeting that would go from 6 a.m. till noon. And in every case, I'd come back and I'd tell people in civilian audiences that the NSC, the brilliant, dedicated, experienced people, cautious, objective, law abiding, we could handle 3 issues at a time before we were overwhelmed. But there were 1,000 issues out there that someone else was worrying about. But at a national level, we peaked out. I think part of the problem we're having with Trump is every day he's adding another issue that on the face of it looks completely illegal, un-American, no American values involved in it. You can't keep up with it. Some of them are actually now termed minor, destroying a good piece of the White House. He seizes Venezuelan bound oil at sea in international waters, sells it, and sticks it in a bank account in the Middle East. I mean, so the issues keep tumbling out one after another. And for a variety of reasons, I think the pushback, except by the broad public, which is now getting the whole point of this, but the pushback against Trump is incoherent and ineffective. They just can't keep up with the guy. So I think that's one of the major issues facing us. And by the way, I'm not too keen on the Democratic Party leadership anyway. The most effective Democratic politicians, one of them that I love to talk about is AOC. Brilliant, attractive, gifted, tactically aware. Not a policy she talks about do I support, but at least she's an honest, hardworking, astute young political leader, and a lot of them are out there with nothing. A couple of weeks ago, I watched a white Republican congressman happily and confidently saying on camera about Greenland, of course we should seize it. We're the dominant predator nation in the region. Who talks like that? The U.S. has had its terrible flaws throughout its history, and still does. But mostly we pretended to aspire to be the good guys, not the torturers, the murderers, the invaders, uh, pirates. We act like pirates in international waters half the time. So things have just gone off track, and I think the opposition is terribly ineffective, except maybe the American voter is starting grudgingly to say, okay, I had a problem with DEI, I had a problem with this or that and the other thing, but right now we got to. Some people would term this our government as a government of gangsters that pay no attention to the law, never mind the Constitution.
You hit on so many good points there, and I think the prioritization one is especially important and powerful. I don't know how we were first put in touch. It might have been through Les Gelb, who was a great mentor of mine, who used to always say, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. He used to always remind me that strategy was about relentless prioritization, about defining goals, about truly understanding strategy. And there's such a risk to being so overextended and so unfocused, especially for our military leaders that have to chase him. This is going to be a wild summer of politics, news, and elections. Primaries continue to roll on. We have the biggest midterms ever. The intersection of sports and politics is happening every single day. And you can trade on the biggest political races and activities on Kalshi. You can trade major primaries, election outcomes, and the biggest political storylines as they happen, leading up to the biggest midterms ever. You can pick who's going to control Congress. You can pick who's going to win the Senate race in Maine, Graham Pletner or Susan Collins. You can bet on the World Cup. You can trade on the World Cup and much more. It's all on Kalshi. You're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use the code for this show, independent, and get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, Kalshi, where you can trade on anything, including just about everything you hear about here on Independent Americans. 18 and over only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Even contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see Kalshi.com/regulatory. But check out our friends at Kalshi, who are big supporters of Independent Americans, and go to Kalshi, where you can trade on just about anything, and they'll help you stay vigilant. And I'm glad that you highlight how most of the opposition has been effective. I've said this over and over again. He's all gas, no brakes, and nothing is slowing him down. He continues to have the most powerful military the world has ever seen, and nothing's stopping him. And AOC is a great example of somebody that's at least slowing him down, at least asking some hard questions. She's able to grab the microphone away from him. I want to come back to the good guy piece in a minute, but let me ask you something else that I've mentioned on this show. One person who's been totally invisible is Tulsi Gabbard. When they made this strike on Venezuela, it was reported that she was taking pictures on a beach. It looks like she's been squeezed out of the decision-making process. Rubio continues to amass more. But I just want to ask you specifically, I mean, I know you've watched her political evolution. I've known her personally, and now she's totally changed into something else. But the question I've asked is, where the hell is Tulsi Gabbard? She should be in a very vital role given all the challenges we're facing. And she was usually a public-facing spokesperson as well. But where the hell is she? And what's the danger of her being in this isolated, hidden role?
Well, I've had some dealing with her over the years too, and the fact she was an Army captain and had served in the combat zone and was so attractive and articulate and smart, and the picture of her in Hawaii with her blue uniform and a lei on, I thought it was just marvelous for the image of the U.S. Armed Forces and the reserve components in particular. Something went wrong. I don't know what it was. Hawaii turned on her and despised her, the Democratic Party, but basically Hawaii in general. So it looked like sheer opportunism. But I think a larger issue, Paul, that I'm glad you raised this. It isn't the fact that Tulsi Gabbard disappeared. That's okay. It's the fact we no longer have institutions. We used to have a National Security Council. And by the way, there's several hundred people. They were the cream of American intellectual defense and foreign policy intellectuals. Unbelievable. Loaned from their agency. PhDs from Stanford and Harvard, and just brilliant, experienced people. They knew the telephone number and the private secretary of all the world's leaders. All these institutions have been hobbled or destroyed. And so you got Secretary of State Rubio, who's also the National Security Advisor. You've got people that are in charge of the National Archives. You can't keep up with it. All these positions are defined by law. When I first got to the Pentagon as the Army Strategic Planner, one of the old hands said, go get the DOD regulations that deal with your job and the law and find out what it is you're supposed to be doing. That stuff is gone. So I think Trump, 2:00 in the morning, Truth Social, whims, ignorance, people doing things that on the face of it not only are stupid, but it's embarrassing. I mean, poor Mr. Trump at Davos is a humiliation to us as American citizens, up there making fun of Prime Minister Macron, making fun of Carney, chiding him about you wouldn't be existing without the United States. Oh my God. In some ways, it's just like a dark fantasy. what is going on here. And 40% of the country still supports him. That's what the Democrats need to be thinking about. Why is that? How did they drift off uh, so badly that people look at Trump and say, okay, well, he may be corrupt and incompetent and doing unlawful things, but we got to go with him because of some other reason. And by the way, leadership counts. You got some guy saying nutty things, a lot of people will believe him.
That's a perfect segue into what I think is our top topic for today and for this moment. You know, I love following you on social media because sometimes it's just three words, you know, that really explicitly define the moment and explain for people how outrageous, how unacceptable, how dangerous some of the things that he's doing really are. And I want to ask you to focus on one component. He's the commander in chief, right? He is the leader of our military. He is our face to the world. Like it or not, he is our brand. And I think especially coming out of Greenland and coming out of Davos and coming out of this clash with Denmark and our trusted allies, something has really changed that I think is important. America is now the bad guy because of Trump, right? Trump is viewed as the bad guy. And you put your finger on this. You said, who talks like that? Nazis talk like that. Fascists talk like that. Putin talks like that. And now Trump talks like that. So we're at a point now where Trump is viewed by much of the world as the bad guy. And by default, America is viewed as the bad guy. People don't trust us. They can't count on us and they fear us. Can you talk about just how important that is and how unprecedented it is and how you feel about that in particular, sir?
You know, it's really astonishing to watch this. I used to tell I've spent a lot of time in NATO, the political headquarters in Brussels. Fascinating for me. One-star general. I'd never been in that world, but really outside the military component. And it's a political organization, as you know, not a military organization. And so you know, all the it was NATO at probably 16 then. I've been off and on as NATO grew. I've stayed involved. That I tell people uh, we'd sit there in the military committee, and these beautiful men, almost all men, flawless, multilingual, educated, beautiful uniforms, wonderful manners. They all looked and sounded smarter than us, the Americans. But we were always in charge. And I tell people the reason we're in charge is a couple of reasons. One is we're great organizers. I mean, we can get stuff done like you can't believe. You want 10,000 troops 5,000 miles away tomorrow evening, we can do it. We're great organizers. But the big deal was everybody trusted us. They didn't necessarily agree with us, but they said, no, these guys are actually always acting on a basis of principles and of values. That's gone. I listened to some distinguished foreign policy expert a few days ago talking about the fraying of NATO's ties. Nonsense. NATO is dead. The United States, and it's not going to be just for 3 years. It's going to take us a decade to work our way out of this. The global community, our most trusted allies, the Canadians, for God's sakes, the only thing safer than living next to Canada would be living next to the Vatican. Never mind Germans, French, the Brits, the shared heritage over the years. It's simply unbelievable. They don't trust us anymore, and they shouldn't. So this is where we are.
That line about the Vatican is awesome. I mean, that is the truth. And you understand this from such a personal standpoint. I mean, I think you did 3 combat tours before you were 25, and then you went all the way up to see, you know, the geopolitical work at NATO. So you've been all the way through all of this, and your perspective is so valuable. And it's the kind of wisdom we're not hearing coming from the White House, especially on national security issues. But you've got that historical perspective. So let me ask you to go to an issue that I think was below the radar. I'm an Iraq war veteran. You spent, you know, years covering Iraq and Afghanistan, our forever war. Now I've said that I think Trump is creating a new forever war that may expand across this country, with ICE now going into Maine and who knows where else. But, folks have already put Iraq in the rear view, and way below the radar in the headlines. It was announced that our last troops have left Iraq. They are out of Iraq. They'll still occupy some of the Kurdish region, or have troops in the Kurdish region. But this is a big deal, especially for those of us that shed blood there, lost friends there, and it didn't seem to get much attention. Can I just ask you for your thoughts and analysis on the changing of that chapter with Iraq for America?
Well, to be honest, I have always been fearful of small groups of U.S. armed forces anywhere on the face of the earth, except maybe Great Britain. A lot of my, early history was involved in combat, as you suggest, as a lieutenant or captain. I was in the Vietnamese Airborne Division as an advisor at 2nd Airborne Battalion. We loved these soldiers. They were just fabulous. But there were three of us out there. There'd be a captain, me as a first lieutenant, and some experienced U.S. Airborne sergeant. But we were out there, and we were in fights where we'd have 2, 3, 400 casualties, and everybody in the advisory team would get killed or wounded, and it worked because we had 500,000 U.S. combat forces in Vietnam. So when we got in bad trouble, a Marine battalion would come out of Dong Han and try and get up to pull us off the DMZ. So I've never been comfortable, we can pull all the conventional forces out and the SF, these remarkable teams. I mean, tier 1 special forces units are sheer magic, technology, training, audacity. So I was nervous about the troops in Syria, for God's sakes. National Guard, boy, have they done a great job with a handful of, company minus of Bradley fighting vehicles and a bunch of drones overhead. And by the way, thank God for the U.S. Air Force and Naval Air, who will come in, to a half dozen isolated troops. I don't like U.S. forces being on the ground in tiny numbers. Now, poor Iraq. Uh, I, by the way, I have a one-out position. I think going into Iraq was the right thing to do, along with Afghanistan. The problem is, politically, we screwed it up, and we kept pushing nation building, and Afghanistan, this primitive society, Iraq, riven by these dreadful hatreds and cruelty of Shia, Sunni, Kurds. So we didn't do very well in execution. And by the way, most of that was a political failure. The commander in chief, I think 5 of them in a row, didn't think through the thing. What are you trying to achieve? So I would not be adverse to seeing the U.S. Armed Forces pull out of places where we're on the ground in insufficient numbers. Make up your mind. What do you want us to do? If you want us to take down ISIS, then allow the senior military leadership to craft a plan that is likely to work and give them the rules of engagement required to take on the task. So I think my son served in, I guess, 3 combat tours, and that's a bitter pill. I should spend a lot of time initially denying that there was any parallel between Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan. There was one parallel. We had bad political leadership that didn't understand what they were doing, and then got fearful of leaving, knowing it would collapse. So it was a sunk cost. And as if you're a builder and you get to the 9th floor of a building that you're planning to be 24 floors high, and it no longer makes economic sense, you stop adding floors. That's what the political leadership did to your generation of veterans, and you paid a big price. A lot of Americans are shocked when I say this. There were 60,000 killed and wounded fighting in the war on terror. There's some of the most courageous, dedicated people, volunteers, all that gave their all to follow the instructions of the commander in chief.
Yeah, your voice is so important because of the layers, sir. and so many of them now lay over the rhetoric and the operations of what we hear political leaders talking about on everything from Venezuela to Greenland. And I think the biggest alarm bell for me is that maybe after Venezuela, people think that war can be easy. It can be bloodless. That's a huge danger. And Trump is definitely feeling, buoyed by that. And I think it's a really, really scary prospect where people think they can send American men and women in harm's way and do it easy and do it quick and do it bloodless. But I wish we could spend a lot more time. I hope you will come back. Let me ask you, if we can, to finish with something good. And I'll start and then I'll throw it to you.
Something good, oh, something sweet. Feel the fire, feel the
I was thinking about our relationships and our friendships and NATO. And I pulled up a song by Randy Newman, "You've Got a Friend in Me." Everybody knows that song from Toy Story. And I went deep into Randy Newman's music. I have two little boys. I want to surround them with positivity. We talk about how important friends are, especially in the context of global security and diplomacy. And we talked about "You've Got a Friend in Me," and they thought about Toy Story. So I just want to say, we're looking for inspiration, positivity. Randy Newman's music, from Toy Story to Monsters, Inc. to "You've Got a Friend in Me." Even "I Love LA," the song that they play at every Dodger game. I'm headed out to Los Angeles for a short trip this weekend, and I want to shout out all my friends in California. But just the positivity and the goodness of a great American songwriter and performer in Randy Newman. That is my something good to help you get through this cold week, folks. All right, General McCaffrey, over to you, sir. What's something good?
Well, one of the stories I used to love to tell, a lot of Americans profess to love to hate the French, and I love France. I speak miserable French, but I lived there for 3 years as a teenager. I like everything about it: the culture, the food, the fashions. Their armed forces are actually first rate. They're terrific soldiers. There was some crisis when I was a JCS strategic planner, and the chairman, General Powell, sent me over to France to deal with them on it. And so my counterpart, I was in an office one-on-one with them and making no headway trying to explain why we wanted their involvement in something. And he said, Barry, he said, "I know we're a real pain in the ass, but never forget, when you're in trouble, we'll be there."
I think that is a important reminder and something very good. We also know that you'll be there, sir. You've been there for this country for your entire life. Your family continues to serve and lead, and you're a powerful example of what the best of America looks like at a time when we really need alternative narratives to Trump, and we need leaders that can speak to the world on behalf of America in the right way. And you've done that your entire life. I'm so grateful for your wisdom, your leadership, and your continued service and sacrifice. You've been through so much, and we're going to need your voice in these moments now more than ever. So thank you for all you do, sir, and for joining me again on the show.
Good to be with you, Paul.
And good luck to your Seahawks this weekend. We're rooting for them in my house.
They'll need it.
archipelago, he tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wake, it's time to grow. And it's not cool to believe in school, but if I can say one thing, I've seen the children of the revolution and the good trouble they can bring. He says the red and blue identity, independent is an attitude. An island in the sea of rhetoric and archipelago, he tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wake, it's time to grow.
Powered by Righteous Media.